Okay, hello.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Standard Deviation podcast with your well prepared hosts.
We are. Come on, like I think for this episode, I did like a
No,
hundred
we've done
percent.
our work.
I did my work. I sent the email. I had
Yeah, you sent an
questions.
email and everything. Like, this is super professional.
You know what? Like I see Shiva and Slobodan from No Hacks podcast and Shiva from A to B, and these guys are like have processes and they're using task based thing to generate questions and send them and do videos and they asked me like, "Hey, what's your secret to Simo? How do you do?"
Yeah,
It's like I don't know. It's just we just we also have we use AI for this. Like it's not even us right now. It's
it's
AI.
not really. No, no. It's far too intelligent to be us.
But yeah, how are you doing though? All good?
um, I'm good. Tired. We picking up from the last episode with the risk of opening a can of worms here.
Let's no.
And
Let's
Juliana, when I say can
let's
of
keep.
worms, I'm not looking for like another anecdote about your pets. Um,
Actually, I
so
used to buy worm.
I know, yeah, yeah. So let's just
Not
sidestep that graciously now. So we did get our puppy some days ago. So
Vanyo, right? Or Vi? Oh,
Väinö, it's Väinö. It's like the
Vino.
Finnish version of
Classic,
Wayne.
classic Finnish name. It's.
Yeah. So
I
he's
was
a lovely,
hoping you'd
love.
bring it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't want him to take over our show uh, yet. Yeah, he's lovely. But I was prepared, but maybe not completely prepared. How similar this is to baby time. So he was brought up really well. So he had an excellent breeder. So he's sleeping fine and everything. But it's still like late evenings and early mornings for
Yeah,
me because I'm the one who in our family who can do with the least amount of sleep, which is fine by me. But it's definitely like taking up all of our time and all of our extra energy. So yeah, it's a lot of. But he's absolutely adorable. So that kind of compensates for all the extra hard
exactly.
work that we need to put in.
The dog compensates with cuteness and cuddles,
Yeah, yeah, and
and I'm
he's
sure the
really, yeah,
kids
it's
love him,
just a lot of
right?
fun. The kids love him, and that's and he loves the kids, and that's you know just justifies the entire thing because that's
Yeah,
the while Maria and I, we of course love him as well, but it was mainly for the kids,
yeah.
and their kind of their big dream. But yeah, he's a fully fledged family member of the Ahava family now, so it's really really nice.
So cute.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, but it's
congratulations, and I won't
thank
say
you. Yeah,
anything
it's a
else about
yeah.
animals. This is just gonna look on the window and
Yeah, trying to find some pigeons. Yeah, I know why you look out the window.
yeah, I'm hungry.
Pet shopping.
I'm
Oh, there's
hungry.
one. Come here. I can give you a home.
And also, the Swedish pigeons are like good. They're like rare, good breed of pigeons, not
Oh
like
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah. I can see
Romanian
that
ones.
you're looking at them with a very professional eye. Yeah, I can see that. You're already kind of
It's cool. It's
dipping into
cool.
the gene pool and everything. I know.
You know what? Like a lot of people appreciated that episode for some reason. Like
Yeah,
it's
I think it was like
actually
a yeah.
it's scary.
Yeah. So if the listeners haven't heard, please tune into the episode before this one where we talked about pets and other associated stuff. So, well, pets is a very loose term for what we talked about, but
And I googled the word for like bird phobia, but I forgot it right now. Never mind. But
so I do
let's
have
go.
one
Let's
professional.
let's
I
go.
do
Yeah.
have something on topic actually. I've been working with Replit, which is like an AI agent for developers.
Okay.
It's an integrated development environment first and foremost, but it also has an AI agent, and it's been a very interesting experience. Coming from a software developer background myself, I've used it to basically build an app, a React Native app, and it's theoretically you could have somebody who has no coding experience build a very robust application with it. Like it's doable.
Mm,
The it's a double-edged sword. When you first the initial prompt is really important, like what you actually ask it to do, because that, like in any software development project, the way you organize the project is key to its survival, and how much and how little technical debt you will eventually have to endure. So it does a pretty good job at it when you first ask the agent to do the initial setup of the app, it actually does a remarkably good job at creating the prototype, and you can instantly run it, which is really cool. So you can tell it, like, build this app with all these different screens with this kind of a database. Like, you do have to understand a bit about infrastructure to be able to prompt it properly. Otherwise, it will give you just a shitty database, which just won't survive multiple iterations. Where it starts stumbling is, so it has a Replit has the AI agent has a decent skill in emerging ideas,
Hmm.
so it can actually build pretty nicely additional features to the app. Where it really sucks is remembering what it's done, like keeping a persistent memory, which is kind of weird because, unlike a human who, if I write something, I have a pretty decent memory of what I've written, as long as it's like compartmentalized and categorized well. And the Replit agent does a good job at categorizing stuff. So it does, like I said, it builds a good project infrastructure. But let's say, for example, that in my app, I'm using Firebase as the backend, and I'm asking the app Replit agent has built a very nice like module for communicating with the Firebase API. So all I have to do in my app is ask it to, import this module and then communicate with the API. And it's built it. It's built it itself. It wrote it and added it to the app, and it's right there in a folder called modules, and it's called firebase.ts for TypeScript. So it's all right there. So then when I ask the agent to, okay, now add another feature that needs to add something to the Firebase document. Instead of using this module that it beautifully created, it just starts hard coding those API calls into that screen. So the AI agent loves hard coding stuff, and that's, in the long run, that is absolutely detrimental to technical debt, because you have to kind of, instead of nicely modularizing the app and keeping everything in separate components and separate contexts, it just starts adding strings and adding those API calls directly into those screens. And that's been really frustrating. And much of the time, after the initial kind of wow factor, like 95% of the time is reprompting and just getting mad at it, like typing some really nasty I'm getting really angry with it. I'm like, why the hell did you do that? I can do a better job myself. What do I need you for?
Yeah, yeah.
And so now, like, let's say 75% of the time is just me using Replit as an IDE and writing the code myself. And then occasionally I've moved away from Claude, which did the actual coding, to ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT just for ideas, which I'll then code myself, instead of, the agent does some really weird stuff. Like, I ask, let's say I have a screen where you have a bunch of form fields all nested nicely because I've prompted it 1,000 times to explain how the CSS works. And then I ask it to change the label of one of those fields, like just text replacement, basically. For some reason, it decides to restyle the entire thing. It modifies almost everything in that code. And then when I tell it, I don't accept those. I say that, why did you do that? I only want you to make a change in the label, which is almost exactly like my initial prompt, except I have the why did you do it part there. Then it says, oh, okay, I'll just redo the label. And then it just redoes the label. So it's not sophisticated enough. It's using Claude 3.5, but it's just not sophisticated enough for long-term management of. So at some point it moves from the app being the actual mechanism, or the agent being the actual programmer, to the agent being more like maybe someone who validates, something that validates or verifies the code, instead of actually allowing it to code anymore, because it gets worse and worse the more complicated the software is.
But do
I
you
don't know if
have?
that matches your
No,
experiences with working with
I
LLMs.
have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
But like, first of all, the thing is with the AI agents, they always function on think, process, plan, and act. They have like
Mm.
this process, but it depends a lot. Like, do you have access to the settings of it? Can you add more tools? Because I think if you add a tool for memory and a
Mm.
tool for being able to retrieve things from the past, then it would work. Because the way the Python code is, when you run the agent, it basically does this add tools, and then it calls the actual tools that you give the agent. So for instance, if you do like a if you want an agent that searches online and calculates how many times you were mentioned, you would have a calculator, and you would have I don't know, DuckDuckGo as
Yeah.
the engine. So if you can maybe find a tool that you can add into the
No,
apply file, then maybe you can
Yeah.
actually teach it
Uh,
to.
the capability isn't the problem. Like it's more a question of how it interprets the prompts initially. So,
Yeah,
for example, the Firebase example, I ask it to build a feature into the app that clearly uses the module that it wrote, but I don't explicitly state that. I
yeah,
just state, call Firebase. And I'm assuming it understands that it has this module that it created for calling Firebase, but it hard codes. So when I then tell it, hey, use firebase.ts because it has all those modules, then it goes, oh, right, I do remember that. And then it starts using it. So it's just a way that it doesn't understand, um, it can't put two and two together in that way. It doesn't understand that my question is not related to Firebase in general, but more like the Firebase in the app itself.
yeah.
Um, so
I
it's,
think that
it's,
happens
yeah.
because when you write into a chat message, like even on ChatGPT or Claude, when you interact with an LLM, when you're writing there, that's not necessarily prompting. The prompting
Mm,
actually happens in the settings. So what
mm,
you write is taken and then transformed into how the developers set up prompts to be. So if I write, give me the top 5 science papers about hallucinations, that's not a prompt. That's something I say that is tokenized and calculated,
mm,
and then it's basically transformed in the backend into an actual prompt. So the prompt engineering actually doesn't happen when we talk to the models. It's
mm,
actually in the settings. So everything that we say is basically turned around and promptize. So maybe
it,
if you have access to the settings, then you can
mm.
actually set up the prompt in the backend. So when you say Firebase, they know exactly what you mean. So that's
Well,
something.
I don't think you have that option in Replit, but I am. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure how it works. I did assume that it's actually me directly communicating with the LLM using because it lets me like when I run the same, it has a remarkably similar response type. When I run the same query directly in ChatGPT, it gives me the same same-ish result.
I didn't know either about this. I took a course, so I built an AI agent with Hugging Face. They have a very good free course. I recommend anybody to go and take it. So I built an AI agent that does search and then looks for weather. It's very basic, right? And keep in mind, my Python is
Mm.
debatable and questionable. And I had to do the API file like 10 times to pass the exam, but don't worry about that. But it was saying basically that prompts are actually not what we write to ChatGPT or to Gemini or to Claude. It's basically just a way that we direct how the prompt in the back that's set by OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever works. So that was really interesting to me
Isn't
because
that
I
just
didn't know that.
semantics? But isn't that just semantics? Because you are, you
You
know,
are, but you're
yeah,
not. So what was
yeah,
the cool part is when you build an agent, you actually can write the way you interpret the
yeah,
prompt. So if I say, show me the weather in Malmo, in the back is go and do a search and find out exactly, go and geolocate and find this. So
yeah.
it's pretty cool. I mean, agents are great. I'm actually excited but I'm also not excited about all the debatable thought leadership about it on LinkedIn. But it's cool, and I think again, like I think the most important thing to remember, I guess, when you work with this stuff is kind of to remember that it doesn't think, right? It's
Mm.
just taking the most statistically relevant response. And I don't know
But
if
how
you
does that change anything? Like, how does that change the fact that it doesn't think
well,
that it's just using statistical
think about it.
probabilities?
Think about it. We grow up as humans to think that language is the tool of inclusion and the tool of truth. So when we talk to this, I was talking to Craig Sullivan about this. There was this chatbot called Eliza that
Yeah, I
was
remember that well,
invented in
very well.
1966. Yes. So by then, people were like fascinated and in love and very emotionally attached to it. And it wasn't like what we have large language models. It was just a chatbot. It was just an algorithm that was giving responses. So all of us right now interacting with these tools and we're using language as the tool of communication, we are taught as people to trust and to believe it's truth. But when you actually ask a model something, the concept of truth doesn't exist. It's just basically what's the most statistically probable response because everything that you write is tokenized and based on the words that you have there you will have a score and then the model basically just associates the score of your prompt to what they have in the backend. So I actually tested this. For instance, if you write in ChatGPT, Helsinki is, the automatic answer is going to be capital of Finland. But what
Mm.
if you wanted to say Helsinki is cold in fucking cold in winters? but the model doesn't care what the truth is or what the context is. They just give you the most probable answer. So I guess
Well,
what
that's what you get, but that's what you get if you ask a random bystander, like,
I
how's it
know, I
is
know.
fill in the so I like my point is I understand, like, that's completely understandable. That's exactly how it works, but
Yeah,
that doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter the semantics of what ChatGPT what the LM is doing when you are instructing it to do a specific task. Like, it's when you are, let's say, from a therapeutic point of view, when you're using an LLM as a partner, for example, for discussing stuff or bouncing ideas off of, then you might get into a kind of circular reasoning with it, that you are communicating with it and trying to get it to emerge things that are don't exist somehow,
yeah,
like a human would. And they might look unique, but they're just unique combinations of existing well established.
exactly. Yeah,
But that's a
point.
very good point. But from the point of view of working with um, this agent, it's especially when it comes to coding and programming, which is problem solving in a very high level and in a very detailed level. It's obvious where its strengths lie, and I'm building. The apps that I build are very standard. They have like they use very typical APIs, and there's no really complicated stuff. So obviously, it does a good job with them. And let's say that, for example, if I were to now start building something like GTM tools, which State now luckily maintains, I think this agent would do extremely good job at it, because the API is well documented. I can just feed it the API documents. I can feed it a UI example, a UX example, and it will be able to generate something new from that. So it is
It's
kind
cool.
of disruptive. It's very cool, um, but it's also it has so many potentials for disaster if you're using it to actually do a professional job at something, because
Yes,
it does so much. It writes so much code, and it gives you the output. You lack the intimacy you would typically have when working on a project where you're well aware of everything that's being written in the app. And even if you don't remember everything, you have these mental models of, hey, I distinctly remember having a method somewhere that lets me call this API. Let me try and find it instead of just trying to reinvent the wheel. So it's making me complacent as a developer, which I think is a very bad thing if I want to avoid technical debt, or if I want to invite somebody else to work on the app. So that's, I get back to my original point. I think a very good use case for a software development AI agent, at least with the current tools and with my very limited experience thereof, is to use it to build the very initial prototype, the initial project structure, with which it's really good because that's just
very good
mechanical
again.
work. Import all the necessary libraries, add some tests, and then give me a kind of a blueprint for how to proceed myself as a developer with this. I think that's an excellent. It shaves, days and days of initial project work.
Why don't you build that? Because you can. Because you would know. I
Well, I
would.
mean, that's what I did with the app. I did ask it to just give me the starting point, and now I'm just using it to bounce ideas. This is my third iteration with the app. The first two were just trying to. The first one was trying to get the agent to build all of it. The second was taking over some of it, and now I'm just using it as a. But it's really cool. Like, I think many people are,
I love it so much, man.
and yeah, you're building. You can use React Native. It's not built in, so you have to kind of get it as a template. You can use React Native, which means that you can technically build an iOS or an
I
Android
love
app
it.
and
Yeah.
put them right into the stores, and maybe even make some money. Like, if you build something that's smart enough, or if you build 1,000 of those and put all of them in the store, some of them will start making money for you. So it is pretty cool from an entrepreneurial point of view, and I think that the biggest naysayers of AI are, of course, the content creators, and understandingly, or those who feel like their content is what is being fed to these models. And there's the creative licenses and the intellectual property rights. I think it's scary, because this code is coming from somebody's brain. These ideas, this structure is coming from some human beings who actually designed it first. So it is. There's a lot of. I empathize with the opposition, but I do also think that there's a lot of potential for growth here.
For sure, because again, it doesn't replace thinking. It's something that helps you basically bounce ideas and brainstorm. And again, like I was talking to Craig about this last night because we're both like very deep into researching hallucinations right now. And my conclusion is hallucinations are actually not bad. They're just emerging trends that we maybe don't have enough data to prove at that point, especially when you work with unstructured data. For code is different. Code is math.
Mm.
Code is precise. For this other stuff that I'm interested in using it with, it's a bit different. But again, it doesn't replace thinking. You should be, because Craig was saying, like, the more he uses it, the more he realizes how wrong it is with some stuff, because
Yeah.
he has so much experience as a researcher that he is able to see the issues. And as you said earlier, when you look at a big chunk of code, you know exactly where the context is of, everything that you have in there, but the model doesn't. It's just like super, practical.
Mm,
Here's the code
yeah.
here. So it doesn't replace our thinking. I think it's just something that really can, like, help you find things that you don't know about, or like
Yeah.
things differently. And when is SIMO-bot coming, though?
Well, we'll see.
You need to do it. Like, why would you not if I was you, I would just give it everything that you did, which is probably already using. I've actually asked something about server side, and you were quoted in the
Oh,
sub.
nice.
Yeah. So when
Yeah.
is the SIMO bot coming, though?
We'll see.
That would be so good.
I'm
You
not
don't have
ready
to
to be
talk.
replaced.
You wouldn't have to talk to nobody again. Oh
I
my
know
god,
that
you
would be
should do
really
that for
cool.
me.
Yeah. One more thing that I thought about is when it doesn't replace thinking. I think one thing it's sorely lacking, which is the same as with search, non AI search, like regular search, is the link from a claim or an output to a reference of the source material, or how did it come by that? Because from coming from like an academic point of view, if you're asking ChatGPT for or whatever LLM agent or AI tool you're using, if you're asking it for a factual statement and you need that statement for something, the more you use these tools, the more you might become complacent and not
Yes.
actually checking where the source comes from. And that's why hallucinations, I completely agree with you and Craig, they are very interesting to research. And I think that
Yeah.
there's actually potential for content creation with hallucinations when it gives you like a bunch of stuff that doesn't exist. You're like, hey, if it actually suggested these, there might be a source of it. But but what if you use those
Time
as
to.
the actual truth? And I know
Yes.
that you shouldn't, but the more you use these tools, the more like immersed you get into that world, and you start forgetting the basics. And it's the same with any any kind of propaganda machine. If you are immersing yourself in one single form of communication, you are very become oblivious to the kind of methodologies that you've learned in school, in life, on how to actually verify those sources. So it is risky in that way as well.
It's a good time for me to plug my newsletter, Beyond the Mean newsletter on
Oh, good
Substack.
point. Yeah.
And make sure you read my article, Attention is Intelligence, where I actually explain the attention model behind the
Yeah.
LLMs, and we talk about a lot of this stuff. But also, don't forget, this podcast is sponsored by Simmer.
Yeah. So first of all, everybody go and subscribe to Juliana's newsletter. It's a wonderful long read every week. For now, every week. I know that
I'm
it's
trying.
somewhat.
I'm
Yeah,
really
it's
trying.
difficult. But yeah, you're doing a good job at it. And yeah, Simmer is the proud sponsor of this podcast. And we've had a slow start to the year. There's been a lot going on, but we are working on a bunch of new courses. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter on teamsimmer.com/newsletter and use the code deviate, that's DEVIATE, to get 10% off any individual course purchase on our site at teamsimmer.com. And now we have time to finally invite our guest. And we're going to be talking about, let's see if we can build a bridge between this topic and AI, but we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome
But maybe,
just in a bit.
when you're using, sometimes when you talk to AI and you bounce ideas, sometimes I really feel like I don't know shit when it comes with
Yeah.
crust, ref, because I set up ChatGPT to critically think and contradict everything that I say. So let's have our guest, and Juliana needs to shut up. Yeah,
Hey, Nicola, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me.
we're very excited to have you and talk today, especially since the intro we did has nothing to do with this conversation.
Oh, we did use the last 2 minutes for
For you.
discussing this topic. um, so the topic of today, we of course don't know where we are actually going to end up in, but we're going to
Mm,
start with imposter syndrome.
mm.
Now, I think for the benefit of many of the listeners, let's start by Nicola. Maybe you can tell us what it is in your view, your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, so my perspective is like one of many, of course. I actually don't like the term imposter syndrome anymore. I would define it in my way, but I've gone from calling it imposter syndrome to like imposter syndrome tendencies or having a wobble, having a moment, that kind of thing. What I would call imposter syndrome, and when we all kind of know it, is like we feel that where we are now, all our achievements and everything, we feel that we've kind of like fluked our way there. We kind of feel fraudulent, that kind of thing. The way that I would describe it though is like manifestations of self-doubt, and the way that we let ourselves kind of like consent to those manifestations, kind of thing. But yeah, like what I've discovered is like I think nearly everyone I've spoken to about this, everyone has experienced it, like male, female, whoever. It's crazy, and it just kind of tells me that like everyone, to some extent, feels like they've winged it or are winging it. So that's kind of, I want to say like reassuring. You know what I
Mm.
mean, right?
Yeah.
So it exists within everyone, at
So
least the people I've spoken to.
so I have just a couple of thoughts. So how does it how does it differ from just saying that somebody has low self-esteem, or is it the same thing? Are they overlapping things?
No, I've thought about this like so much, especially over the past 3 years, where I've done like a lot of work on confidence personally. Like I gave a talk about imposter syndrome actually. I think it was last week at Women in Data and Analytics at like Nordics edition. Um, yeah, and so it was really difficult to kind of like talk just about imposter syndrome without like going into like confidence overall, because it's part
Did
of
you have imposter
that.
syndrome talking about imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, I had the delicious irony of it. Actually, like this morning, I was talking to a friend of mine. I was just like, I'm about to go on standard deviation, and oh my god, like the guests that they've had before, like, am I qualified? And I was like, oh, for God's sake, this is just ridiculous. That kind of thing. Oh, I've
Question is,
digressed.
are we qualified, Simo, to do this?
No, 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 no,
'Cause
no,
I'm not.
no. I thought that we would be like the most disarming podcast host because we are so underprepared that anybody who comes on is a total star compared to us.
Not so, oh my God. Sorry, I took the
Yeah,
scenic route round to your question, Sim, and I still haven't quite
yeah.
gotten there. I think it's intrinsically linked to like low self-esteem, self-confidence, all of that kind of thing. I think it's part of the
Mm,
same package. I don't see it as the same thing. I see it as like a manifestation
mm,
of that. But I think even somebody with like higher self-esteem or that has like higher self-confidence can still get imposter syndrome. It can come in moments,
mm.
that kind of thing.
Right.
So and it really depends on like the situation. To give like a real kind of like consultant type answer is like it depends, like
Mm.
because every person is different. Every person will have like different triggers. There's different things that different people care about. Yeah, that kind of thing. I mean,
So,
I've
so it,
certainly
yeah.
experienced it a lot.
So it can be more like an attack rather than something chronic. You can just
Yes.
occasionally feel inflicted.
Yes, and I think that the word chronic there is the reason why I actually don't like the term imposter syndrome, because syndrome kind of implies that it's
Yeah.
chronic and you can't really get rid of it, and it's something that's inherently bad.
Mm,
I've kind of done a reframe of imposter syndrome. Again, it's taken a lot of work on confidence, on getting to know myself. It sounds really cheesy, but I have had to like just tune into myself and like get to know myself and my triggers and all of that kind of thing. And now you can actually use imposter syndrome or tendencies or whatever, and you can actually switch it around and just realize that it can actually work for you as well. I can go into that like a bit
yeah.
more. Um, so there are 5 manifestations of imposter syndrome that have been identified by somebody called Dr. Valerie Young. Um, I call them manifestations. She's called them 5 types of imposter syndrome. Let's see if I can do it off by heart. So there's the perfectionist, which is just incredibly high standards and nothing's ever going to be good enough. The expert, which is something that I suffer from the most out of all 5, where it's like you think that you need to know everything about everything, and you're never going to know enough. There is a superhuman, where you may have like quite a lot of roles to fulfill. So like with me, I'm I was gonna say I'm a marketer. Actually, I'm an analyst now. I'm an analyst. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a friend, etc., etc., etc. But I have to fulfill all of those perfectly and everything. I must post stuff on Instagram. Like, look at what I'm doing with my kids. I need to go on LinkedIn and like write about
Mm.
all my knowledge. Not, I don't. I rarely write on LinkedIn, just for the sake of argument.
Hey, 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 hey.
Nothing wrong with it. Your content is excellent, Juliana. um, what are the other ones? Then there is the natural genius. So if competency doesn't happen immediately, that equals failure. So you need to be able to do everything and know everything immediately. Otherwise, just like, ugh.
Mm.
And then the last one is the soloist. So asking for help, for example, might be seen as a weakness.
Mm.
So those are the five types or the five manifestations. There's a lot of overlap
Yeah.
between them, a lot of overlap. And I don't know whether like either of you can kind of, I went through them very, very quickly, of course, but I don't know whether either of you can kind of like recognize some of those
I'm
traits.
all of them.
I'm all of them at some point. I'm all of them at some point. And again, it depends on the situation as well. I think I'm very prone to expert and perfectionist.
Yeah.
Um,
So would you say that the Romanian in me right now, but I'll tone down Simo, the Romanian in me, I promise. This episode, Romanian will be quiet. But no, would you say that the fact that we doubt ourselves maybe is because as humans we're just validation needy? Like we just need the validation. Because I find myself, if like, for instance, my husband validates me for different things that I do or for how I look, I
mm.
don't feel as bad as, for putting 20 kilograms that I never took out in the last years. Or like if I do something good at work and a client says, oh my God, this is good. Or like, I don't know, Seymour, like I really liked it when you shared my newsletter in your newsletter. That was kind of cool. So I felt super validated. So like I don't feel so stupid with myself if I get the validation. My question is, do you think the self doubt that you have sometimes has to do with the fact that maybe you are not validated or you're not feeling appreciated and then you're afraid because you tried it once? You're afraid to try it again because you might be met with, I don't know, something that makes you feel bad.
It's interesting. I've never thought about the validation part specifically in relation to it, but I think there's definitely something to it. And I think for me, I'll share like a story of something that happened in January last year at work. So I'd worked incredibly hard on this research project that we'd done, and we were going to present it to the client, obviously. And I knew my story, I knew the slides and everything, and then for whatever reason, like my words just kind of like disappeared into each other. I got a frog in my throat, so I started coughing like crazy. My kids ran into the room, so anything that could have like gone quote unquote wrong went wrong. And then after we'd finished the presentation, I just was like head in hands, just like, oh my god, that was so embarrassing and everything. And then like unlock new core memory, and then I was just like, oh my god, like what on earth? Like my initial reaction and my initial feeling, so the knee jerk thing was, why on earth was like I allowed to kind of like present? Why was I doing that? I'm clearly not good enough. That kind of thing. That can become so toxic if you let that build and build and build and don't address it. And then I actually got I reached out for some help. I was like, I'm not doing that again. I need to, because it's part of my job to be able to present and everything. So I get very nervous with virtual presentations because I feed off physical energy like a vampire, and obviously I can't really replicate that through a screen. Um, and yeah, the validation thing. So I got reached out for help. I got on a phone with a career coach, and he said, okay, so I won't take you through the whole conversation because that was like at 90 minutes. But the output of that was you're outsourcing like your success, or your version, your definition of success to others' validation or others' metrics of success. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So you're trying to feel validated, and you're basing that on like what you believe others' metrics of success are for you. And I
Mm.
thought about it. I was like, that's actually quite true, because I remember thinking like at the time, because there's like 20 people online, all camera off, so I couldn't see body language or anything like that. But in my head, when I was like coughing, or when I had to like take my kids out of the room and everything, I was just assuming that everyone's sitting there behind me, like really looking intently at all my beautiful slides and everything, and like really paying so
Mm.
much attention. That they're thinking, oh my god, who is this? Blah 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 blah. And then when I was talking it through, I was just like, but then I realized somebody could be there because their manager made them be
Mm.
there. Maybe someone is just like, they've got the screen there, like with my little face and presentation on like this screen, and then they're turning to this screen and like doing some work in the background and everything. I hadn't thought about it that way,
Mm.
which is kind of like, was that egotistical of me? I mean, I don't know. But does that answer your question, Juliana? I
Yeah,
hadn't
yeah, yeah.
really thought about it in great detail with regards to validation, but it reminded me of that.
It's kind of like it's something I think we're born with as kids. When we
Yeah.
draw something, we go to the parent, and parents don't have time. That's something my parents used to do to me. I used to like. I actually love painting. I do it from
Mm.
time to time. So I was always going to my parents to show them my painting, but my poor parents were working when my dad was drinking, but that's another story. But my poor parents were working like non-stop to feed
Mm,
us because I come from a very, very modest background. So
mm,
I think that's when I kind of like started to need the validation from other people because I
mm,
didn't get it from my parents. Where
mm.
I always, like, my brother is an architect,
Yeah,
and I was always like in his, shadow growing up because he was the smart one. He was the one that
yeah,
finished polytechnics. He was, so I guess what I'm trying to do with my kids right now is to give them that confidence. So my son,
yeah.
like the most basic shit. Oh my God, this is amazing.
Mm.
Mm.
I hope, thank God he doesn't listen to this podcast. But what I'm saying is, I think it does have to do with that. And I guess it's human. I don't think it's
I
egotistical. I think we all think to some degree how something is going to be perceived. Not
yeah,
Simo, though.
Well, I got to say something, and this is going to
Go
come
ahead.
across cocky, and it's
Go
going to
ahead,
come from a place
Simo.
of privilege, but I don't really recognize those things because, and in me, because I have to say I have a very strong thought model for battling this, and this
hmm
is actually something that I read just last week, which is great that we're having this discussion now because it's so fresh in my memory. But Adam Grant wrote something in Blue Sky, and he wrote that imposter syndrome is essentially a paradox because let's say you're talking on stage and you've been invited to speak. um, you've been invited to speak and there's an audience of people who
mm,
are looking forward to your talk, no
mm,
matter how you spin it in your head. And no, they're not all going to be invested or interested, but they're all there to listen to you. So somebody values your achievements enough to actually invite you over and have you on that stage and share your expertise. You doubt that in yourself. You say that this is not possible, like I'm here as a complete fraud. I absolutely shouldn't be on the stage. And yet you choose to believe your doubt.
mm,
So you don't believe the audience, and you don't believe that you're validated, but you do believe yourself in the one thing where you shouldn't believe yourself. So it's weirdly paradoxical. Like, why do you choose that moment to believe yourself when you should be believing all these
mm,
external circumstances that brought you here? And my way of battling with those kinds of thoughts, whenever I have a nagging feeling of doubt in that way, I just have this way of looking back at everything. I've put so much work into being where I am. I have, I'm so furiously proud of all my achievements,
mm,
and I use that as maybe I have some way of compartmentalizing that stuff because I can push all that other stuff out. I have had moments where I've thought that I must be really lucky to have made it this far. For example, when I get accepted to a job, I feel like, wow. I mean, all those other applicants must have been. How did I get here? I had the worst application and worst interview, and I was still selected. And that, I think, also combines with this privilege notion, because obviously there are positions of privilege that might let you off the hook, which I might then confuse with feeling self doubt about myself. But lately, over the last 10 years, when I've been essentially an entrepreneur and decided how I want to do my work, I've been very, very adamant to myself and very much taught myself to do anything I can to avoid those feelings of self doubt. But by just knowing that this is where I've managed to make it myself. I don't know if that's Dunning Kruger, on the other hand, feeling,
they're related though, right? They're
yeah, they are.
related. But I mean, I do like that. I follow Adam Grant. I hadn't seen that. But I really like that line of thinking. But I think like imposter syndrome tendencies or whatever, they tend to happen when we like lean into the self-doubt without
Mm,
countering that with like the
yeah,
self-confidence. And like one thing, what I mean, like one tool I have in the toolbox in terms of like battling the whole imposter syndrome phenomena, if you like, is to like just go and do the thing,
yeah,
but also like bank those achievements as well. So when you've
yeah.
been given like some really good feedback, and I like specific feedback as well. I don't like feedback just like great job. I can't
Mm,
really. I mean, it's nice. I won't deny it. But I really like specific feedback. Like this was
yeah,
like the behavior that you did, and then this is the impact or the outcome, that kind of thing. Because that is so specific. You can bank that. Whether that's like taking a screen grab of an email and then saving it in like a deck or something, just so you have that to look back on. Sometimes you can just remember it, like some people can. I'm not great at doing that because I'm always on the scratch for like more critical feedback because I like to learn, and that's the whole expert thing in me. That like the expert manifestation in me.
yeah.
It's like I need to learn more, I need to know more, I need to know more. So I was like, yeah, bank the feedback,
That's a
bank
really
the
good tip.
achievements, and then just go out and do the thing. Because if you sit and like fester in your own imposter, I mean, like you two, Juliana, when you say stuff like, oh, you've got imposter syndrome or stuff like that, I'm like, but I don't know how, because like you've got so much great knowledge that you share, and everyone, like, I'm not surprised at how many people have subscribed to your newsletter, and I can see your face now. You're just like, oh no, but I'm not surprised. But it's because we're
That's
all so in
smokers.
tune. We're all in our heads. We're all in our own heads, like way too much. We're all in our
Yeah,
we're always our own worst enemy and
that's the
and
paradox. Like
critic,
you're
right?
doling that praise on Juliana, where you're just as deserving of that for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. But I think it also has to do with how we have been brought up, because we are a product of our environment. So like,
Mm,
I guess it depends on, in my culture, you're never good enough. Like you are never told, like, by your parents, like, I love you, or you're doing a good job. My mom does it, but my dad never said I love you to me. Never. Or like, I'm proud of you, or something like that.
yeah.
So it depends, like, I guess each country or it's a mix of things,
Mm,
in each culture. And I my husband resonates with this, because he's black, he's American, and in his culture it's kind of the same as in Romania. Like, you have to work 10 times harder just to be at the same type of level with everybody else. So when you come from Eastern Europe, you kind of come with like this chip on your shoulder,
mm,
because of the perception that people have in general. And I use that also kind of like to put Romania back on the map and say, like, hey, like, we're actually really good engineers, or really good
mm,
marketers, or really good thinkers. So,
mm.
but I do agree that Simo, you're right. Like, we tend to choose the shit part instead of actually like looking at the good part. I don't know why we do that, because
Yeah, it is interesting. I don't know. I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's like when I'm always like more kind of like looking forward to, in a way, like receiving the critical feedback. Like, okay, so what did I do wrong? What
I
can
don't
I
like
get better at?
feedback.
What can I improve? Because I'm like, it's this whole thing to self improvement and growth for me. Um, but
Me and
then when
Simo
people
hate.
said, oh yeah, I'm going to give you some nice feedback, because I'm like, if you must,
I
which
fucking
is
hate
ridiculous
feedback.
when I think about it, right? I think culture is an interesting one. I was thinking about this. I mean, I haven't got the same experiences, but I was thinking about it in terms of like the whole British culture is very kind of like, we lean into humility probably a bit too much at
Same in Finland.
times.
Yeah,
And is it the same in Finland? It's the
it's
same here in
absolutely the same in
Denmark with like
Finland.
Jantelo and all of that kind
You're
of
not
thing.
supposed to celebrate your achievements. You're supposed to keep
Yeah.
them on the down low. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
it's the same in Denmark, and yeah, very similar in Britain. And it's just, humility is a really good thing, because you don't really want to come across as like arrogant or cocky or whatever. Lean into it too much though, and it's just like, then what have you got? But it's always finding a balance. You don't want to go the other way, like you don't want the pendulum to swing too far into like self. Like,
I used
I
to
was
do
going to say, you
this.
don't want to swing into self confidence too much. Of course, you want to have good self confidence, but you don't want to swing so far that it ends up being like arrogance and like, oh, I can just do no wrong. But I don't know anyone like that. So do
There's this
you?
there's this there's, there's
Maybe I'm
this
lucky. I don't
there's
know.
this dude that there's this dude in the analytics community that I won't name him just because I don't want to give him attention. But Simo, I think you might know who I'm talking about, maybe. But anyway, moving on. I used to do this workshops called "I'm Remarkable" with
I
Google.
remember.
You
Yeah.
know those, yeah. So basically, one of the main takeaways. So this was a workshop for women and underrepresented groups, but also for men as well that wanted to join. And one of the things that they teach you in this workshop is that achievements don't speak for themselves. Like, you have a lot of them, but because of how we're brought up and our culture, we feel that if we celebrate our achievements in public or with others, we come off as cocky.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a mental construct. But I
Yeah.
want to ask you something, because you transition just like me from
Yeah.
marketing to analytics. So doing that is fucking scary, right? Because we both know that. So tell me more about, like, how did you deal with the imposter tendency, and like,
Yeah.
what would you advise somebody that, because there's a lot of people transitioning right now that
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
watching us. So that would be
Yeah.
helpful to know.
So I'm going to actually take you back to 2002 first. I will answer your question, but 2002, I graduated with a music degree. So I studied classical music at a very, very high level. I played like violin, piano, a little bit of flute as well. And that's what I studied for 3 years. My entire career was kind of carved out for me at age 11, because I just happened to be good at music. And so, okay, well, then obviously you're going to go to music college, or you're going to go to like a university, where that specializes in like classical music, and so that's what I ended up doing. I knew halfway through that this was not the path for me. I didn't like hanging around in those circles. I didn't really like playing anymore. I do now because I do it as a hobby. But I did a degree anyway, and then I graduated in 2002 with no idea what I wanted to do. It took me 2 years to kind of like figure out what is it that I want to do. I landed on like marketing, advertising, and then it took me 2 more years to actually get into like well, not in a marketing job. I actually started out in media sales like you, Juliana. So I was selling like garden ornaments to pensioners to start with. But it took me 4 years between like graduating in 2002 to 2006, getting like my first like proper job. That was my first major transition. Like I didn't have any business background whatsoever, but I didn't care. I did not give a shit. I was just like, what I know is that I want to get into this industry, and I will do anything I can to get into it. This is before the days of LinkedIn, so I was. This is. I don't know whether it's embarrassing to share this. I'm going to share it anyway. This is the days of MySpace. Do you remember
Nice.
MySpace? I was on MySpace, like this, like
Oh yeah.
shit emo profile picture probably, and like music in the background and everything, but I was writing to people like these randoms on LinkedIn, that anyone that had like marketing manager or marketing in their profile, I would write to them and just say, okay, so I want to get into marketing. Have you got any advice? And one person out of about 20 got back to me, like Matt from Manchester. I remember his name. And he gave me like, he gave me some advice on my CV and everything. I can't imagine like doing that like now for some reason, not reaching out to I mean, I could obviously like I'm more honed in terms of networking and everything. But my point is that that is like the biggest transition I've made, but I didn't care. I didn't
Yeah.
care. And I think yeah, I think it's because I became more aware of the unknown. So my like imposter syndrome tendencies and everything, they heightened or got more extreme the more I learned and the more I became aware of what I don't know. So it's just like a few more, I got into media sales, and that's when I was introduced to Google Analytics, and I've constantly been drawn to analytics like since 2007 kind of time. But the more I learned about everything, and obviously like I learned more, so I gained more experience, but then I was also just like, oh my god, but I don't know that person knows this. Oh
Mm.
my god, like I need to know this. And then that got worse over the years, because like the more experience I gained, obviously like you're just more aware of what you don't know, and so it just got worse and worse and worse. And I don't know whether I'm making it sound really linear. Obviously it kind of like went up and down and everything. um but yeah, and then another transition I made was obviously moving from the UK to Denmark. The job market was completely different. It was really, really tough. End of 2012, it was so tough. I had a few years of experience at that point, but I've been working agency side with UK retailers, UK e-commerce, and then coming over to the Nordics. Didn't have the language at the time. There were no jobs, and it was so tough. And then it was just like, I've got to figure out this, and I don't know this, I don't know Danish, I don't know the Nordic market, and then rejection after rejection after rejection. That was super tough. I'm going to fast forward now because I'm going on a bit, but that was like the general pattern. It's just like more years, more I'm aware that I don't know, until I ended up pressing self-sabotage at one point where it sounds dramatic, but it's for a fact. um, I'd let it get to a point where my confidence was on the floor, and it was like a multitude of factors. I'd had two pregnancies and two redundancies whilst I was pregnant, which didn't help. COVID happened, which meant that working from home at a new job where I was just alone with my thoughts. And I know that other people didn't really have that, but with me, for some reason I was just like sitting at home with my thoughts, trying to kind of like block out the sound of like kids and everything in the background, and like I've just come back from maternity leave, I need to kind of nail it and everything, and I just didn't feel that I was nailing it. I ended up changing career, or sidestepping career very briefly, and just stepping out of marketing. It's like, well, clearly I'm just not cut out to do marketing, despite having worked in that arena in various disciplines for like goodness knows how many years. And then I stepped into a job that just didn't suit me
Mm.
like at all, where I was an actual imposter. It's the only time that I've genuinely been like an imposter. I genuinely don't know how I got the job, and I'm being really truthful, really truthful. And I wasn't great at it. I wasn't using like the skills. It wasn't using like what I'm best at, if you know what I mean. It wasn't using like my optimum skill set. It had nothing to do with data, and I missed it. I was going to measure camp, and I was just like, oh god, I missed this so much. Um, but then I got sick of it. I was like, I don't want this anymore. And so that was about 3-4 years ago. And so I started doing a lot of work on self confidence and imposter syndrome and everything. And what I did was just kind of work out how it shows up for me. This is with the help of a career coach again. It's not all on me, but those 5 manifestations that I went through earlier, like really getting to know them, knowing when they show up for me. And what I now call them is like the inner critic. So there's the inner critic, inner coach model, which I absolutely love, because it's a bit of a kinder way of seeing yourself and getting to know yourself and being in tune with all of that. The inner critic is more of an irrational voice, is a bit more of a reflex. So if you take the expert, for example, which is like what I'm most guilty of, oh, you don't know enough about this, you don't know enough about that. That's really knee jerk, it's really irrational, and it's a reflex. You can then counter that with the inner coach, who is a bit more rational and is able to kind of like take the inner critic and those feelings that you can sit with and just learning, okay, so what is actually showing up for you here? What is this? Because the inner critic is trying to protect you. So this is why I don't like the word imposter syndrome, because it's kind of negative. The inner critic, it's a bit more positive, even though the feelings might not be so nice at the time, but it's trying to protect you. It's trying to say to you, okay, what is it that you're afraid of something? So what actually is it? And then the inner coach can actually counter that, sit with it, be more rational and reassuring, and then take that feedback, put it into action. So the expert, I don't know enough about this. It's just like, okay, you don't want to, the what is that protective mechanism is saying like, I don't want you to be shown up. I don't want you to be embarrassed, that kind of thing. And it's not a bad thing to want to learn more. And I'll just finish up like really, really quickly. So again, Juliana, I took the very, very scenic route round to answer your question. So like now that I've transitioned from a marketer to an analyst, because I've done so much work on this, I've actually felt the imposter syndrome tendencies far, far less, just because of the work that I've done. And I can recognize how that shows up for me, and I can then kind of counter that self-doubt with self-confidence.
Are you using, like, could you rephrase that you're using imposter syndrome as a tool? Like you're actually using it to not as a derogatory way, or something that takes away something from you, but you found a way to kind of turn it into a benefit in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a really
Exactly.
good way
Yeah.
to actually work with it.
Yeah, and that's why I don't call it imposter syndrome anymore. I call it, as I say tendencies, or having a wobble. That's a very British expression, but kind of cute. Or having a bit of a moment. But it was uncomfortable at first, because you have to really sit with those feelings and just sit with that self doubt. And it's not nice, but you do get used to it, and it does need to be practiced. It does need to be practiced, I would say. But then once you learn how it shows up for you, then you get much, much better over time at being able to counter it. So, I mean, I know that people who tell me, oh, just don't listen to that voice, just don't listen, just flick it off your shoulder. But it doesn't really work for me. It might work for others, and that's great. It never really worked for me, because it always just kept coming back in different ways
Yeah.
and finding, like, clawing its way back in. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just lean into it and then, counter it.
But also, one could argue that, especially in digital analytics, like everybody has their own strengths. I don't
Yeah.
know all the shit, but I used
No.
to like beat myself over it initially
Mm,
when I transitioned. But now I don't care. Like
yeah.
I don't need to know how you guys are doing data transformation. I don't know. I don't need to know how you guys are
Yeah.
sourcing and doing ingestion
Mhm.
and what happens with BigQuery ML. Like, of course, you need to know. Like, that's why I really like the technical marketing handbook and all the stuff I also
Mm,
wrote about technical marketing, because you need to be part of the conversation. Like, the more you understand how things work, and you're like T-shaped like this to kind of
yeah.
understand I
Mhm.
guess just the concepts and the context around data transformation or data readiness or data engineering and server side, like just knowing theoretically this, it helps you from a business perspective where your skills are like being very commercial and basically, focused on analysis and
Yeah.
storytelling. That gives you context to be better at your job. And also, your
Exactly.
skills can help the technical people in your team
Yeah.
get that type of business vibes and context so they can do their work better. So
Exactly.
I just think
Exactly.
I used to, again, like, just as you beat myself over it and try and try and try, but then I just got to a point where like I just realized these are not my strengths. So
Yeah.
you have to play in the end. You have to play to your strengths.
Yeah, I relate
The,
to that so hard, actually, because I originally wanted to get into analytics, as in I wanted to become an analyst back in 2017, I think. So like after my first after my eldest son was born, I was like, okay, I've been made redundant. This is an opportunity for me to finally, I can get into analytics, like digital analytics properly. And so I was like, well, then obviously I need to learn JavaScript. And I did, like, I think Code Academy, the whole coding for 1 hour a day challenge. And I kept it up for 33 days. But I hated it. I didn't, and I was just like, is this what I have to do? And I think I actually spoke to you at the time about it, Simo as well. Um, Gosh, is this really what it is? Is this really what it is? And now, like, the conversation, like, what is a digital analyst? What is an analyst? Like, that's kind of like front and center now, or it's one of the conversations that's like front and center in the community, I would say. But I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. I can't do JavaScript. I can't sit and just do and script for like 8 hours a day. No
That's
way.
what it
So
takes. I'm sorry to tell everybody. That's what it takes. If you want to be an analyst, you have to know JavaScript. There's a great course for that.
Yes, I know.
nice.
The best thing I
but I'm
learned from JavaScript was actually how to do project management and how to think, how
yeah,
to compartmentalize
yeah,
things and how to create a plan and test. And like, that's the great thing
yeah,
about code, then learning how to position things in a project, how to compartmentalize it, how to make logic, I guess, transitions to other
yeah.
things. So that's why I think for me, that's what JavaScript is like, taught me very, very good planning and project management, which is
Oh,
very
that's wicked.
helpful.
That's wicked. For me,
Yeah.
I mean, like
I don't shit
learning.
though.
No, I know, but learning JavaScript for like 33 days. I mean, I decided I can't do that, but it helped me have better conversations with backend developers at the company that I was working for at the time, or the company that I went on to work for after my maternity leave, I should say.
I'm
But
laughing at
yeah.
your face.
No, I'm
Yes.
full of
Sorry.
understanding. I'm
Yeah.
just dripping understand. So, but you know what scares me in what you said earlier is that you said that learning more and kind of increasing the amount of unknowns that you don't know about yet, uh, that actually aggravates imposter syndrome, which is again kind of paradoxical because you're
Mm,
actually doing the one thing that imposter syndrome is trying to tell you, which is you don't know enough. You're
yeah.
trying doing the
Exactly.
one thing to actually address that
Yeah.
directly, and it's just getting
Yeah.
worse. So it's a very it's fascinating. And now that we've talked about it, I do I do take some of my cockiness back, and I do recognize some of that because there is definitely the notion of especially in technical industry that there's so many abstractions out there that if you start looking under the hood, you get overwhelmed with
Yeah.
how complicated these things are. And then you start looking, hey, I'm 41, I'm turning 41 now. I only have so many years left to kind of
Oh,
learn new things.
yeah.
So what should I focus on?
Yeah.
And why am I even doing it? So it can get you into a very detrimental spiral
Yeah.
unless you start actively like suppressing that and figuring out how to turn it into an asset, like which you
Yeah.
have done successfully, or at
Yeah.
least you're getting there,
Oh,
which is a
yeah.
really good way to combat it.
Yeah, totally. I completely relate with the age thing because I turned 45 this year, well, at the
Yeah,
end of the year. But I'm just like, oh my God, how many years of work have I got left? Like,
yeah.
more than I think. For some reason, when I think, okay, I'm going to be
It's
45, I'm
like
just like, well, obviously, I'm going to be retired
5 years
tomorrow.
left.
It's
Yeah,
so ridiculous.
it is.
But it means that I have to be a bit, I am the
Yeah,
age I am. I think aging is a privilege for me. But
yeah,
it does mean there's no denying it. I'm not in like my early 20s. I haven't got like the world at my feet any
yeah.
longer, that kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm much better at prioritizing. Okay, so what is it that I actually need to learn? Like yesterday, I was actually sitting with my manager, who he's been like amazing as well. So having a really good support network is incredible. Um, so I'd really recommend like trying to build that up too. My manager's been incredibly supportive of this transition, which has really helped. But I was sitting with him, like learning about Neo4j and graph databases and everything, and
Mm,
I'm learning Cypher, so I can actually query this. And there's like so many components and
yeah,
everything of what it like. So there's creating the graph and everything. And if like, and so I would say like 3 years ago, I would have sat there and just thought, oh my God, like I need to learn this, I need to learn this, I need to learn this. But I just took it as like, okay, this is really interesting. Where I'm going to start in bolstering my technical profile, which is what I really want to do this year, is get way more technical. Where I can start is just by querying the graph. Learn how to query the graph. That's where I'll start. I'll just do some basic queries and get independent doing that. Then I can build on that, and then I can improve my Python skills because we're using Deep Note as well with it.
yeah,
But then I can build on my Python skills as well. I know like a tiny bit of Python, like enough to put in my LinkedIn, and I created like some small scripts which help like my day to day. I would never call myself a programmer or an expert or anything like that. But I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. But that's where the expert manifestation has really helped me, because it's just like, you need to learn, you need to learn, you need to learn. But now I'm good at countering that, listening to what it's trying to tell me, and now I can prioritize what it is I'm going to learn. And I'm okay with not learning everything. I think, coming back to what you said earlier, Juliana, in terms of like the T shape and everything, you need to learn like the playing field. You need to understand the playing field and everything, but you don't need to be like the striker and the midfielder and the defender and the goalkeeper, that kind of thing. You need to like work out where are you on the team, like what is your strength, and really try and optimize that.
Mm.
Yeah,
We
no.
have yeah, we have time for a couple of small topic run
Yeah.
throughs, but I wanted to ask about the creativity, because you have a creative background, and had you
Mm,
continued your music career, do you think it would manifest in the same way? Because technical, like being an imposter in a technical context is very understandable, because you can quantify it. You know that Python has these things that I know nothing about, and yet I am writing about Python. You can actually quantify the unknowns.
mm,
Whereas with music, I mean, obviously, if you are a soloist on a grand stage, you might feel that, what am I doing here? Like, there are so much,
mm,
they have better options available. But let's
mm,
say, for example, you're working in a jazz improv group, where
mm.
you're not working off notes, and the
Mm.
notion of technicality comes from somewhere deep inside. Do you think there are differences? Do you think one is more susceptible to imposter syndrome than the other, like a creative versus technical?
I was thinking about this really recently, just because like when I did the presentation, I brought up like my music background, which made me think like, if I'd like continued and become like a performer, whether in an orchestra or a solo, and then there's that's completely different as well. Like, would I have gotten it? And like, did I used to have that? But then I was much younger, so it's difficult, because you go on stage and yeah, there's always someone to compare yourself to, though. So when I was when I yeah so this is going to sound really arrogant, but like when I was at school, I was the one that people compared themselves to, because
Mm,
yeah, I just
yeah,
just the fact, that's what it
you
was.
were
It
very
feels so
good.
weird. Like, yeah, I was good.
Good, well done.
When I
This is
got
how
to
we fight imposter syndrome.
but when I got to university, when I was auditioning, actually, so when I was auditioning for music college, I actually didn't get into music college, because there were just so many other people coming in, not just from the UK, but like from all over Europe and the States and whatever, that are just much better and that put way more hours and dedication into it. And then interpretations of certain pieces can also be subjective. I
Yeah.
was also forced to play Mozart, and I hate Mozart. I hate playing Mozart, and I don't care what anyone says. It is so
Mhm.
god awful boring, and I just hate it. I was forced to play that. I was never ever ever going to get the best performance out of me playing Mozart. Give me something by
Yeah.
like a Russian composer, and I would just go for it. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just again
No,
just
no,
like
that's
rambling
yeah.
here. But I think there's always something. There's always someone that you can compare yourself to.
Yeah.
There's always like a different interpretation. So, oh, why did I not think about like playing it that way? Why did
Yeah.
I not kind
That's a
of
good
like
point.
put a little bit more of myself into this passage? Oh, that's really cool, that kind of thing. But yeah, like, it's harder to quantify, because
Yeah.
it is just more subjective, and then it's dependent on other people's tastes as well. Whereas like more in technical marketing, I'm not saying there's like just like one right way to do everything,
Yeah.
but I think it's probably a bit easier to quantify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I have one more thought here. Is you talked about the inner critic and the
Mm.
coach being these kinds of things in your head or sitting on your shoulders, and you're talking to them, which is mentally sound, of course. But what about we spent the intro talking about AI and LLMs. Do you think there's value there in bouncing your ideas and getting, even if it's just a computer that uses statistical probabilities for the tokens that it produces? Do you think there's value in sharing your presentation there and getting them to actually tell you, this is actually really good and you're going to kill it? Like, is that okay?
Ugh.
Is that a good mechanism for it?
I think it
Because
can.
they can read the presentation, they can compare,
Yeah.
the AI can compare with all the other presentations they have in their training data, and they can actually
Yeah.
say that this is actually, you nailed it, and here are some other ideas that you might want to add there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, I've got nothing against doing something like that, with a caveat of use it as a sparring partner and don't outsource the
Yeah, exactly,
validation to an
versus content
LLM, right?
creation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's Yeah, I mean, I love using AI as a
Yeah,
sparring partner and everything, but I would never outsource my
yeah,
thinking to it. Like, I'd never say, write me a strategy, tell
yeah.
me what this is saying, that kind of thing.
There's
But
the risk
use
that
it
it
as like,
only just exacerbates the imposter syndrome. Like if you say you're not, good enough at Python, and then you start using, Claude to write Python for you,
mm,
you're going to be able to do your job, but it's just going to get worse and worse. Like, I
yeah,
could never do what this AI does. I could never
yeah,
achieve that, and then you're just going to outsource more and more because you don't want to
exactly,
take the
yeah.
risk.
Yeah, so it really depends on how you use it. Really, really depends on how you use it. I mean, with Python, like I've got my script, my little tiny baby scripts in Deep Note. I got that from ChatGPT,
Mm,
but then I just got ChatGPT to just break down every single line. Just tell me
that's
what
really good.
this says, because then I want to learn it. I don't want to just like copy paste something from
Yeah,
GPT and then that's directly into Deep Note. I'm not learning anything that way. So yeah, it really, really depends on
yeah,
how you use the tool. Don't use it as your form of validation, but
yeah,
use it as a sparring partner,
yeah.
100%.
Great.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming here to talk to us today.
This
This
is so much. Time has flown,
I
man. I
feel
can't
like this
It
believe it.
for
has.
we had fun.
Yeah,
Yes,
no,
it
it's
was
been
lovely
fun.
to have an expert of your caliber on the podcast.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Take it. Take it. Take it.
Yeah.
Resisting the temptation to just say, oh,
No, no,
no,
don't say
I
No,
won't
no.
anything.
say it. I won't say it.
No, your experience are really valuable, and you gave some really good tips for people who are struggling with this, and some really good like mental exercises to work with it. So it's
Oh,
it's
I'm
absolutely
glad. I'm
valuable.
glad.
And I heard so many good things about your talk at Women in Analytics that you had. Like, I've seen, like, got messages. Oh my God, you should have come. You should have seen
Are
her
you going to
talk.
turn it into a roadshow, like do it in other places as well?
You should.
I might take it to Measure Camp Copenhagen
Oh, that's great.
in June, yeah. But I'm planning to write about it. I'm planning to
You
write about it
should.
because I do want to share my slides. I just need to turn them into like reader friendly because there's a lot of images that don't have context. So I need to write some text as
But when
well.
you do, send it to us so we can plug it also to this episode, which I might actually air for International Women's Day if the gods
Oh
are
my
aligned with me.
God.
Look at me promising things. If you don't hear this part in the podcast, it means I didn't release it. No, I'll try. I'll try. Thank you so much for coming over today,
Oh, thank you for the invite.
and I will ping your LinkedIn profile in the episode notes. So guys, go ahead and connect with Nicola there. And yeah, see you guys next time. And no pigeons were heard during this podcast.